I enjoyed Starfield for what it is. I got about 400 hours into the game, so I definitely got my money's worth from it. But looking back at the game, there is a lot of wasted potential that is just frustrating to see. The planets are a great example of this wasted potential. They have 1,000 planets, but only a handful of POIs that you can actually explore before the whole point of the planets themselves becomes repetitive and not worth sitting through the loading screens. Starfield is just filled with stuff that, in my opinion, was designed poorly. And the reason for some of this poor design, I think, comes down to BGS doing too much, in my opinion. The bread and butter of every BGS title has always been exploration and questing. But in Starfield, they really did neglect those elements because the variety of dungeons is just not there when you compare it with Fallout 4 or even Oblivion Remastered. So with this video, I'm going to talk about the empty planets first. And then I'll talk about other things that I think were designed kind of poorly in the game. Because even though I find the game fun, that does not mean it can't be better and that it's not above criticism. With that said, let's talk about the empty planets, and specifically the points of interest, because the selection is abysmal. Once you've seen one cryolab, you have seen every single cryolab, down to the dead bodies, to the enemy placements, to the enemy types, everything. It's all exactly the same. And I think that's really bad, because the whole point of these 1,000 planets, in my mind, is that you can go to every single one of these planets, and you should be able to see something new, or see something different. So the fact that these 1,000 planets end up just being copy and paste because they decided to procedurally generate everything but the actual dungeons themselves really does hurt the game. And I know some people think to themselves, instead of 1,000 procedurally generated planets, I would like a few handcrafted planets. And I'm not against the idea, but I think it would be better if they just started to put more variety into the game. And the way the game is now, they're not going to just undo the 1,000 planets. Even if it was a mistake, or at least the way they handled it was a mistake. The best thing they can do now is just make more dungeons for us to explore, or make a procedurally generated system for the dungeons like they did in Daggerfall, like FromSoft did with Bloodborne in their Chalice dungeons. I would personally be fine with either system, but I do think putting procedural generation into the dungeons would be an easier system with the game we currently have now. Now, with this next thing I want to talk about, the planets themselves, I do feel like with a lot of them that the POIs are spread too far apart, and I do know that the Rev 8 does alleviate this issue, but I still think that they should put more stuff into the planets. And I get not every planet needs to be filled with stuff, some of them should be barren, maybe, the higher leveled ones or something, I don't know how the system would work. But I do feel a lot of the planets that most of the people visit should be packed with unique stuff to do, and they don't need to all be points of interest dungeons. But they should be some sort of landmark or something you can interact with or something to grab the player's attention. Because I do think that part of planet exploration is a bit weak. It's why when the game first came out, you would see people just bored out of their mind walking to a point of interest, and they would sarcastically be saying something like, "Oh, this is so fun." And that's just because the points of interest are too far apart with some of these planets that people visit. And again, not every planet needs to be jam-packed, save some for the modders or people who want to do outposts and stuff like that. But I do think a majority of the planets need stuff. They need to follow the open world rule. I think it's like every 30 seconds you should see something. I don't know what the exact quote is, but something to that effect I agree with. Now, those are the two big things that make the planets feel empty, or people consider them to be empty. It's just the copy and paste point of interests and just the lack of stuff to interact with when you're exploring the planet. And I know some people want to complain about the procedural generation, saying all the planets kind of look the same. And maybe they do. I don't really care personally, so I'm not going to talk about it in detail. But if anyone has that sort of criticism, I think that's fair. But I want to go on to other things that I also consider to be just bad design of the game. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about when it comes to bad design, and something I wish Bethesda games would just not release with, is the main story. And I know that might sound kind of crazy, but Bethesda Game Studios has never been able to really make a compelling main story for me. I've always found their factions and just minor questing and just dungeon delving in general to be more interesting to do than the main story. Like, my favorite Bethesda game is Oblivion, but I find the weakest part of Oblivion to be the main story. So of course Starfield is kind of the same thing, and I would use Constellation as a way to get into New Game Plus because I like that system. But I do think having them be the main story and the place you're supposed to go back to, I just don't like the way they're implemented into the game now, and I wish Constellation was treated more like a faction that you join late game to get into New Game Plus and to get your Starborn powers. Because focusing in on them as much as they have, I do think hurt other areas, because they could have used their budget to make more dungeons for the planets, instead of just this kind of boring main quest. The next thing that I think's been implemented into the game poorly or designed poorly is the Radiant quests and mission board. Now, I'm not against procedurally generated quests. I do think Bethesda hasn't done overall a good job at doing them. Specifically, I remember in Skyrim, after killing the Emperor, you just got procedurally generated quests to kill homeless people by the Night Mother, and I just thought that was kind of underwhelming. And I like the mission board. I have that mod on Skyrim, but I feel like we're missing some context on why we're killing like Crimson pirates and stuff, right? Like, I know they're pirates and bad guys, but if we got some flavor text into why we're killing Crimson pirates or Ecliptic mercenaries, it would help immerse the players into the world better than it currently is now. As they are now, they are serviceable. So in short, I don't think the systems themselves are bad, I just think the way they're implemented is bad. Now, the next bad design thing I want to talk about is the general world design of Starfield itself, because I do feel it kind of misses in a few areas. The best example I could give is Neon and that whole water planet that it's on. Now, I like Neon, but the issue I have with the city and the whole water planet in general is, why are we not seeing other fishing rigs on the whole water planet? Because if I was Benjamin Bayou, I would want to have more rigs to make more Aurora, because that's more money. So I don't know why there's only one fishing platform or fishing rig instead of multiple ones. And sure, you don't necessarily have to go on them, but I would like to see kind of a visual of these fishing platforms around the planet when you're looking at it. Because the way it is now, it's just kind of weird, this one platform. Because you would think they would want to spread it so they could make more Aurora and make even more money than they currently are. Another world design issue that I could kind of bring up would be like Aquila City being the cowboy town. Now, I get that cowboys are cool, you know, I like Red Dead Redemption, but at the same time, I kind of wish that we saw like ranches and cattle and maybe some farms in Aquila City, because it's just kind of weird that they're a western cowboy town, but they don't have any reason to be like that. Because in my mind, they're just kind of like New Atlantis, but 1800s western style. The last bad design thing I'll talk about is space in Starfield, and I know other people have gone deeper into it than I have, so I'll just keep it kind of short and say that it breaks immersion when most of what you're doing is fast traveling. Now, it's not the biggest deal to me, but I can understand why a lot of people have issue with the fact that this game is a sci-fi space game, and the only thing you can really do in Starfield when it comes to space is fast travel from planet to planet. You can't actually fly there, there's no cutscene, there's no immersion, and I get why that can rub people the wrong way when games like No Man's Sky, Star Citizen, and Elite Dangerous exist that have way more in-depth space travel. And I will say that I get why a lot of people had issues with Starfield overall, because the game advertised itself on exploration, but when you actually played the game, a lot of that exploration was just really undercooked, and they've never fixed it years later. Now, I get I've been kind of harsh with Starfield this whole video, but I'm coming at this game out of a place of actual enjoyment, because if I didn't like the game, I wouldn't talk about it. Because I don't talk about games that I don't like. Like, I'll never talk about Battlefield 6 because I don't like Battlefield. So it's only really the games I really like that I'll ever talk about. I think that if they made Starfield more like a modern day Daggerfall, with it being more of a life simulation game rather than just a traditional BGS game, I think the game would have been way better. Or at least for me personally, I think it would have been better, especially with the 1,000 planets and just not having anything on there. I think they should have just gone all in with procedural generation, and I think that's actually one of the problems people have. Of course, they could have made the game more small scale and handcrafted, and that would have been fine too. But I do think the lack of procedural generation in their dungeons is a massive problem that doesn't get talked about enough. Because I do find the space atmosphere and the space setting, or whatever you want to call it, to be really good for that type of simulation thing. But instead, they just kind of made another BGS game, and they kind of just wasted the space setting and just made it a lot less interesting than Fallout or the Elder Scrolls. Now, let me know what you think in the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe, and...
I'm sorry, sir. It's time for you to leave.